Hi, I'm Jared. This is my hometown. It's one of a few cities nestled along the Columbia River in the heart of the Cascade Mountain Range. Here, logging and harvesting other natural resources are the foundation the community was built on. I love my home, but I've grown concerned with the impact we humans are having on the ecosystem's natural cycle. I see news articles showing the devastation we're inflicting on habitat, spanning all over the world, and the impacts on the wildlife.
Yeah, and so just finally, I mean, are there any solutions so we're not making more species extinct? I mean, this is 1 in 8, so what do we do?
The one piece of really good news in this report is that there are solutions. There are things that we know how to do. The question is, do we have the political will to do them?
Logging of our planet's forests is a very common practice. According to the World Resource Institute, 80% of our natural forests have been logged. From sea to land, environmental dilemmas are becoming ever more pressing.
The hoof rot either causes an elk's hoof to grow abnormally, what's called slipper toe, or in other cases causes the hoof to decay away. He says half or more of the elk he sees have it.
To our credit, we are becoming more aware of the issues. However, knowledge is power, and this film seeks to further expand on what needs to be considered. What people who do not live in areas that have active logging industries may not realize is, once logged, the land is often replanted with trees with the intention of harvesting those trees again in the future. To accelerate this process, herbicides are applied to the land to suppress other types of vegetation from competing with the tree saplings. The common scientific claim put forth about this practice states that the herbicides are not harmful to the environment, but there is much debate amongst environmental and human health communities as to whether this is true. To further my understanding of herbicide use and its possible ramifications, I sat down with Peter Hayes of Hilo Woods, a forest management company, for a conversation.
My name is Peter Hayes, and my family and I own and care for 1,000 acres of working forest land called Hilo Woods.
So Peter, how did you get in forestry?
I was really born into the world that we're operating into, and our family's been involved with forests and sawmills since about 1830, so our kids are I think the 6th generation.
So what are your general thoughts on herbicide use in forest management?
I think it's a complicated issue, and because I think there are a number of very logical good reasons why people use chemicals in forest management, and there also are some really good compelling reasons not to use it. So it presents a societal challenge to figure out, how do you balance those two issues? How do you choose if you're a landowner? How do you choose if you're the general public about what approaches really are most appropriate?
So why would a person choose to use herbicides?
I think the main reasons would be if you're working at getting young trees growing, use of herbicides to kill competing vegetation accelerates the growth of the trees. A second reason is in this area we have a fair number of invasive non-native plants that can overwhelm young plantations. And I think the larger issue is society wants lots of things from our forests. They want water, they want us to store carbon, they want us to have wildlife habitat. But the irony is the one thing society will pay us for is wood. So it makes sense that people would maximize the one thing society says they'll pay them for. So it's not a surprise to me at all that if you look at the whole system, that there's a fair bit of chemical use. It makes logical sense given how our system works. So essentially it's like a market failure 101 situation, that if we valued these things, then we would create a different set of dynamics.
So Peter, you say you limit the use of herbicides on your property. Why is that?
We limit it for three main reasons. The first one is we have concerns that in addition to killing things that we might want to kill, we could be killing or harming things that we really care about. So one of those could be risk to humans is a thing, but also to the whole ecological fabric. We also know that there are many animals, particularly birds, that depend on that early forest vegetation to exist, and they're in serious trouble in this region. So we feel like we have a responsibility to try to operate in ways that create habitat for the whole range of species, so it's addressing the problem. The second one is that it's really an unnecessary expense and risk, that the chemicals are expensive, there are risks involved, so if you don't need that expense or risk, why would you take them? And the third one is that I think that there's a range of scientific uncertainty that makes us uncomfortable. So if in doubt, we'd use the precautionary principle of if we're not sure, then we'd choose not to use it. And a great example there is all of the approval of these chemicals is done by having the single chemical applied. The actual practice is to mix a cocktail of a variety of chemicals together. And in a number of studies, it shows that there's synergistic effects so that the consequences of a mix of chemical is different than if you sprayed one chemical and then you sprayed the other chemical. So it just seems pretty risky to us, the idea that how you're using it and how they're approved are not aligned.
So with the lands that have already been processed, and when they start to regrow, are there any stark differences between herbicide treated and non-herbicide treated?
I would say yes. And I can show you in the forest the difference between areas that were planted with herbicide use and ones without. And the ones that have the herbicide use, the trees will be taller faster and more reliably spaced than the places where we haven't. And the ones where we haven't used herbicide, we have adequate tree cover. Those trees will have grown more slowly because they're competing for sunlight and moisture and other things with other things. So that's for us a trade-off, but it means that our total profit from growing trees would be less because our trees will grow slower and not always as solidly stocked across the landscape. So there are definitely trade-offs. But on the flip side, the areas where we haven't, we know from our bird monitoring that it provides really important habitat that's very scarce. So we're providing safe haven for creatures here, and that's a high priority. So it's a matter of a trade-off.
Balance.
I think a larger issue, though, that we're unsure of is what's valuable here is not the trees, but it's the soils. And the thing we wonder about is if we regularly use herbicide on a landscape, maybe those soils will be fine, but also maybe over time there would be impacts to the whole living system of the soil that would make it less productive over time. And again, we don't know the answer to that, but that's the kind of thing we wonder about, and one of the reasons why we would choose the less risky path of saying if we don't need to use it, let's not use it.
If we were to look into the future, how do you see the appropriate approach to forest management being?
I think it really, if you look to the future, it kind of calls the question of what kind of forests do we want? Do we want to continue on a path that's prioritized growing large quantities of relatively low quality wood and timber production being the most important thing? Or do we want to choose to create forests that absolutely provide great wood but provide a wider range? And I think that question comes both to the forest landowner, but our behavior is shaped by the markets for what we provide. So it's really a whole societal question. So for instance, when you go and buy a piece of paper or buy a 2x4, you're voting with your pocketbook and you can decide what you want. Or when you go and elect a politician, you can say, do I want to send someone to Salem who's going to work on these issues or not? So I think that yes, there are questions of what the landowner is going to do, but there's a larger question of what society wants. And a lot of the landowner behavior is not necessarily always what the landowner wants to do, it's what the larger context that we operate within will reward us for, and which comes back to my original point that we shouldn't be surprised that we have a system that uses a lot of chemicals, because we have a set of incentives and drivers where that is a priority. And so many people as landowners have chosen to pursue that route, and will continue to until the system changes. So it's really up to you.